There are lots and lots of grey water systems out there. As I said earlier, there's some brochures up here of different systems, and the Grey Water Industry Group has fact sheets that you can grab about all the information. It looks like there's 3 of them, but in fact they're back to back, so there's 6 fact sheets all about grey water system, type of systems, maintenance, all those kind of things are easy to grab. But you can get some very cheap systems and you get some very expensive ones, depending on what you want to spend. But you know, if you're looking at a typical family, and a typical family of 4, you'd easily save 100,000 litres a year. 100,000 litres of grey water from your laundry and bathroom going onto your gardens, growing your food is a good idea. I'm sure you'll probably appreciate that. And as you go from small kids with lots of washing to teenagers, lots of showering, you've still got the volumes there. So just be mindful that in terms of rainwater tanks, grey water, all those things, grey water systems are the most efficient systems in terms of, and cost-effective systems because of the huge volumes involved. Again, being very popular. Once upon a time, everybody had a rainwater tank. People are now looking at that, and I mentioned this morning, and I don't recognise the same faces, so I can say the same story. I'm pretty sure you understand our climate is changing, and we are drying out. The Water Corporation have already predicted this winter to be the same as last year, about half our rainfall. If that happens, I'm sure you appreciate the difficulties we're going to face in the years to come. It makes sense to become a little self-reliant, to look at ways in which you can harvest water, use water. The ultimate would be to have a rainwater tank plumbed to your house, to your laundry for example, then grab the laundry water as grey water on your garden. That's when you start to make the most common sense ideas. But of course is the cost. And to buy a rainwater tank, not only thousands of dollars, but to get it all plumbed up and pumps and bits and pieces, we're still looking at 5–10 grand for a decent system. And the same with rainwater. So there's an initial outlay, but on the other hand, think about the long-term sustainability and the long-term investment to your property. As I mentioned, having some emergency water might be a good idea. So there's a whole range of different types of tanks, as you can see, from slimline to steel liners to poly, but most of them have other things involved. I'm not too sure if the next slide has got any more detail, but things like leaf eaters and first flushes and that kind of stuff, or one on the side of the tank here, to guarantee good water quality. You can't just simply go from the gutter into the tank and think that's it. Those days are over. If you ever look inside the tank, you might be a bit frightened. So you really need to set up with filters and pumps and first flushes and leaf eaters and do those things to make it safe. There was a few extra things there. And of course, the variety of tanks that you get these days. In Perth, very popular is buried tanks because no one has any land. There's big houses, small blocks. So they're under the al fresco, under the decking. On other properties on the farm, you use big steel liners. Switching devices, like this one here is an example, so that if you run out of rainwater, mains water kicks in. That's a legal requirement these days. But a little system like this with a pump inside the tank, or an external pump, is going to cost about anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. Okay, so you need to be mindful of the cost of some of these items. Permaculture is all about using space, trellis, vertical, horizontal, what it might be, recycling things. I've seen lots of good examples of old wheelbarrows, with herbs and things growing in them, and some kind of pots with holes smashed in for the strawberries growing over, trellis to grow deciduous vines, or what it might be, or production. So obviously thinking about growing things up as well. Because I'm sure you appreciate that if you have a round patch on the ground and you've got 10 plants in it, if you imagine making a mound out of that, you can grow more than 10 plants. Okay, you've got more surface area, and then you start looking at the idea that some of those plants could be in the shade, some are in a well-drained position, some like the moisture there down the bottom. So you can start looking at the needs of plants, and that's where permaculture comes in, is to look at all the different needs of those plants and to kind of put them in the right place. And of course it is about gardens. More and more people are growing their own food again.
Thank you.
I think if you ask any nursery about, what are you selling, they'll say seedlings, veggie seedlings. And veggie seedlings are just going through the roof at the moment. People are just growing their own gardens again, putting veggies in. The veggie tanks are quite popular. We make them, we know. And so people are doing all these things. There's been lots of little courses and workshops, and there's little local groups. There's a Hills Permaculture group, for example, that meet once a month, usually at the Steiner School in Parkville, and doing work there. But they go to different people's properties, etc. There's another group in Kalamunda that meet again once a month and look at sustainable living ideas and about growing their own food and have little workshops. So there's tons of things around about how to learn those skills. And so we need to think about kind of growing more food as much as we can. I'm sure you appreciate food is getting more and more costly. I've noticed that myself this last year or so, that things just seem to be a bit dearer. And it doesn't take much to grow some things, basic things, whether it's even in tubs or fruit trees or what it might be, and to learn those skills. And there's tons of people who can teach you those skills. And we need to be mindful about pest control. So the kids aren't there kind of picking up butterflies, but you might recognise the one in the middle there, over here. That's when they were teenagers. It was a while ago now. But the whole idea of, you can have a very productive garden, but as long as you fool the pests. And in this bottom right-hand picture over here, you might see an interesting little fellow. I'll point him out to you. Here he is, just there. There's a duck in there eating the slugs and the snails. The whole idea of permaculture is to basically mix and match. So you can see the diversity there. So if you watch these Garden Australia and you see the guys with their sleeper beds and they put the row of cabbages in, the row of broccoli in, okay, that kind of scenario. We don't do that. Because all you're going to do is get the white butterflies coming and say, wow, look at that, and dive bomb and hammer the cabbages. But if you put a cabbage here and an onion and a garlic and a bit of rosemary and disguise the food, the pests can't find it. Because the pests rely on the smell and the shape of things. So when they see a whole lot of broccoli heads or cabbage heads or what it might be, they're just going to home and you get hammered by grubs and pests. But if you hide it amongst everything else, disguise it, you'll have healthy food and you won't get the attack. And having animals like ducks and chooks in the system, controlling that in there of course, helps with that pest control. If there's issues about slaters, issues about slugs and snails. As I said, garden beds are getting quite popular and stuff like that. They don't have to kind of go to that extreme to grow food, but people think they are a good way because you can just be at this height. I'm getting a bit old myself. I don't want to be on my knees in the garden. I just like to be working at this height and working in the garden. It's great to be able to do that. And it's just a matter of simple topping it up. And by having something like that, whether it's out of sleepers or bricks or whatever you've got to use, doesn't matter. But having something like that means that the dogs don't chew the irrigation, the rabbits and the bandicoots don't get in there and dig it all up. Slugs and snails find it hard to get up there. So you help with all those things as well by having things off the ground a little bit. Permaculture is about a series of steps, if you like, and principles to design. So without reading through these, just quickly mention in passing the observation idea of looking at which way the winds blow, where the sun angles are, where the shading is in the summer or winter, that kind of stuff. Where there's danger of fire, where there's a good view that you want to exploit. Where does the water run? So there's a lot of observation and analysis about where things go before you start doing anything. You need to consider, the needs and functions. So if you're going to have chooks, say you want to have some chooks, that's great, have some chooks, but you don't want to go down to the stock feeders to buy a bag of pellets. That's not an ideal that you want to do. What you want to do is grow the food for the chooks. So if I'm going to have chooks, you know, what 3 or 4 things do I need to have to keep the chooks happy? Well, I've got to have some water for them, I need some shelter for them, I need to have some food. Well, let's think about half a dozen fodder plants that chooks can eat. Whether it's herbs or can make them healthy, or could be just seeds from trees. So we want to make sure that we have any animals that we provide the fodder for them. Because it seems silly to have animals and go to buy the hay or go buy the pellets or buy the bags of wheat to get a handful of eggs, and it's much cheaper to buy the eggs from the shop. So you need to think about setting it up and considering the needs and functions of things. In permaculture, not every tree is a fruit tree or nut tree. That's a silly thing to think about too. You need to have, not so much cosmetic things, but you need to have some trees that are nitrogen fixing, that are shelter trees, that are fast growing, that protect the nut and fruit trees from the sun and the wind, that attract ladybirds for the aphid control. Alright, so you can chop them up as mulch and lay it down as mulch, or you make compost out of it. So it's more involved. So when you have an orchard in a permaculture sense, it's not just rows and rows of trees, there's a tree here and a tree there, but amongst it is some nitrogen fixers and some other companion plants in the orchard. And you do things a little differently from what you might think about. Using patterns, we won't go through the terms, but the whole idea of that, something like guild, for example, is to have an association. So if you wanted to grow an apple tree, you want to have things that help the apple tree grow well. So you might have a nitrogen fixing tree in Albizia next door to it. You might have some comfrey or nasturtium as ground cover underneath it. But we don't want to use sprays to kill it, then we want to actually have a living mulch. And so you have other things that help that apple tree survive and get rid of pests and to grow properly.